In last week's episode, we talked about how No Man's Sky, the universe simulating video game, is a potential entry point to the conversation about whether or not our own universe is, in fact, a simulation. Let's see what you had to say. Undocking on the subreddit gets to something that I think is really important, something that I wanted to touch on during the episode, but we didn't have the time, and that's kind of the political aspect of why someone would want to believe that we are living in a simulation, and the kind of background of the high-profile people who tend to believe that this is the case. And they all have this very transhumanist background and set of beliefs. And this is something that I think we talked about a little bit in the Cyborgs episode with Rose, that this is a very sort of particular view of the world that I think that you kind of have to come from a really particular place in order to not only believe it, but think that it is preferable. And I think that it is a very almost, it can often be embedded in lots of assumptions about class and the availability of technology and the complicated, idea of human nature kind of being the same across the board, which I think is a very complicated thing to say. And so yeah, this is a great comment, and I think something that's very much a part of this conversation. CrashandCern and Killfile both posted on the subreddit, didn't talk to one another, but should have, because they have very complementary points. CrashandCern, as a physicist, talks about how our humanity's understanding of how physics works means that we can look at lots of the very tiny details, and that if we are in fact living in a simulation, then it would seem as though the people who have made it, the programmers of the simulation, have taken zero shortcuts. And that is something that is hard to imagine in the development of a piece of software. Killfile completely agrees with this. As a computer software engineer, they say that they take shortcuts and that you would necessarily be able to find them at some point. I think that this is just a, conversation waiting to happen. Forvrin on the subreddit takes issue with the counterpoint that I made in the episode, that it seems unlikely that our universe would be simulated because our existence is not fun. It's not interesting. It's not entertaining. And makes the point that this assumes that we are the point of the simulation, and that is not necessarily the case, that maybe we are just a byproduct of some other more important part of the simulation. And I think that this is a great point, and I think that we didn't spend a lot of time sort of like we talked about the first comment that I responded to, didn't spend a lot of time questioning why Bostrom may have constructed the argument he did, what his basis for his beliefs or coming at it the way that he did are. And there were a lot of comments about how the whole idea is very human-centric, and there's no reason to assume that humanity is in any way the focus of the simulation, the point of the simulation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's a great point, and definitely one that is worth considering. I would like to take this opportunity to point out that the views expressed by commenters on the Idea Channel Facebook page do not necessarily reflect those of the Idea Channel crew. Tim, don't do this. Don't do it. You have a lot to live for, even if it's simulated. Joe Edwardo, also on the Facebook, brings up something that seemed to raise a little bit of controversy across the board, and I think rightfully so, which was my claim that the forests in No Man's Sky are in some way more enchanting than a real forest. And what I don't mean to say is that forests that you can go to with your meat body aren't nice or fun or beautiful or amazing, only that we rarely will stand in front of them, if ever. I don't think I've ever done this, and I don't think I've ever experienced anyone else do this. Stand in front of them or in the midst of them and say something like, oh my God, a whole forest. That the forest itself as an object has a kind of like de facto existence. We understand that it is a thing that is in the world, and we may be amazed or impressed or in awe when we are given an opportunity to appraise it firsthand, but that there is some other attitude that is brought forth from within us when we are able to appraise an entire forest, even if it's virtual, that was made by a person. And that is when we can have that that response of, oh my God, like you made or generated or made a system that made a whole forest. You put together this whole planet. And so it's not to say that that in some way is more special than a tropical rainforest, only that I think its metaphysical, like its state is not only different, but I think significantly different. And I think that shouldn't be controversial. I'm just having a hard time sort of putting it into words. Daniel, you are not alone. There were a lot of comments all over the place of people who were questioning why this really matters, that whether or not we live in a simulation, whether or not you think we do, think we don't, it doesn't really change anything. It doesn't have a practical effect, doesn't change how you drive to work in the morning, doesn't change how you talk to your parents, doesn't change the taste of cheeseburgers. And in one respect, sure, yeah, I agree. That those things are maybe not different. But in another respect, I think that there's a lot that has a potential to change, and that does change. I think some of it we covered in the episode, like, if you do in fact believe that we live in a simulation, then we do have arguments for something like a higher power. We get into questions about ethics of us creating simulations, whether or not we live in a simulation. If the simulation is for entertainment, is there some ethical imperative for us to act as entertainingly as possible so that the people who are watching the simulation are always having a good time and don't turn us off? That seems like that would be bad. But if you're not, if you don't buy those things, and I think it's forgivable and absolutely permissible if you don't, because they're very far-fetched, then okay, maybe your day-to-day experience, your day-to-day action in the world doesn't change. But I think that there's another thing that's sort of maybe the subtext of a lot of this talk about, like, okay, so what does it matter? It doesn't really change anything. And the subtext is that thought doesn't matter unless it changes how you behave, or it changes some practical set of physical actions that you take in the world. And I think that what this does is this completely discounts the importance of one's internal state. That an effect of some of these things can be that you just simply view the world differently, and that you can appreciate what's going on in the world, how it looks, how it is, in a new light. And that might not change a practical thing. It might not change driving, speaking, or tasting, but it can change how you think. And it can change, like I said, your internal state. And I think it's really disappointing to hear people talk about that kind of thing like it's not important, or like it's not cool. Because I think it's super cool. Abby Slater, yes, I am. And I love that, 4.5 years later, these comments are still happening. In light of Akshay Jaggi's comment, I think we gotta have some real talk here now that No Man's Sky is out. I played it for probably about too many hours. I'm gonna be honest. I like it. I enjoy it. I know a lot of other people don't like it. If you haven't seen Anthony Carbone's Hot Pepper Gaming review on it, highly recommended. I think sort of describes the split in how one might appreciate or not appreciate No Man's Sky very accurately. I do find myself often very impressed with the modeling of the worlds, especially the landscape. I think it's really nice. The atmosphere is very effective. Is No Man's Sky a step in the direction of us possibly building very impressive, very large, very computationally intensive simulations? I think the answer to that question is an undeniable yes. Is No Man's Sky a good simulation of a universe? I think the answer is no. But it's also a video game, so, maybe its point, of course, is to not be the greatest universe simulation of all time. But Akshay Jaggi makes the really great point that if No Man's Sky is in fact a universe simulation, it is very much a snapshot. It is sort of frozen in time. And I think this is not only a great point as far as thinking through what the next step towards an impressive and convincing universe simulation might look like, it's kind of a great game design note. That what does a game look like? What does No Man's Sky look like if it ages? If it has a kind of arc to it? If things degrade and expand and change? I think that we should be clear that No Man's Sky is not gonna generate life, but I think that it provides us, again, a way to think about the steps that we're taking towards something like what Bostrom is talking about. Approximately 47 Bs, I would definitely go back to character creation. This build does not, the dex on this build is terrible.